Good morning. The webinar will start shortly.
(2023) Top Small Business Industries, a discussion with Representatives Marc Molinaro and Greg Landsman. Today's webcast is presented by Biz2Credit. The program is now going to begin, and a recording of today's webcast will be made available in the Biz2Credit Webcast Center following the conclusion of the session. Before we begin, please note that this webcast and all answers provided by the participants are meant solely for informational purposes and are not to be considered substitutes for legal or tax advice. Business loans and other federal lending programs are not guaranteed and are issued at the sole discretion of the lender in conjunction with SBA or other governmental agency guidelines as applicable. The views expressed herein do not necessarily reflect the views of Biz2Credit, its affiliates, or partner companies featured in this webcast. We'll begin today by looking at our agenda, and then we will continue to introduce our host and guests for this morning's presentation. For your awareness, the webcast will last approximately 45 minutes, and we will cover a number of important agenda points as outlined on the slide that should be in front of you now. Please note that all audio is streamed through the computer, and you will be able to view all materials following the conclusion of the webcast. We'll hear from our special guests, Representatives Molinaro and Landsman, and their work supporting small businesses. They will take some time to answer audience questions that we've previously received. And we'll also hear from Biz2Credit's own Ramit Arora about the most recent study that Biz2Credit published on the top small business industries in 2023. And now it's time to welcome our host for this morning's webcast, Biz2Credit President Ramit Arora, who will introduce our guests for this special event. Ramit, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Charles. I'm honored to introduce Congressman Marc Molinaro of New York, our first guest speaker for today's special event. Congressman Molinaro represents the 19th Congressional District of New York. In Congress, he serves on the House Committee on Small Business, in addition to the House Committees on Agriculture and Transportation and Infrastructure. He's focused on empowering small business owners and providing them with confidence. His provide opportunities to show transparency via information technology Post-it Act intends to help small businesses understand complex federal regulations in a simplified way. Congressman Molinaro won his first election at 18 years old when he was elected to serve on the Village of Tivoli Board of Trustees. 1 year later, he was named the youngest mayor in America. In our special event today, we will briefly hear from the congressman about the work he's doing on topics that matter to small businesses, as well as his thoughts on the future for small businesses. We'll then have opportunity for him to respond to questions we have received from the audience. Thank you. Congressman Molinaro, now over to you.
Terrific. Wanted to make sure I had all my buttons done correctly. I want to thank you and certainly Biz2Credit for hosting us this morning. I noted that Representative Landsman tried to jump right in. I didn't want anyone to confuse the two of us. He's much better looking than I am. But nevertheless, I'm thrilled to join him this morning. And I appreciate, by the way, his willingness to work across the aisle. We've worked together on a number of initiatives, and just glad to be with you. I appreciate that introduction. I'm always happy when somebody starts the introduction by saying I was the youngest this and the youngest that, because it reminds me that I've had a very long history of being young. And so, as noted, I came to Congress this last year and serving in my first term, as you know. I serve on the House Small Business Committee. In particular, I chair the subcommittee on innovation, entrepreneurship, and workforce development, which have been truly critically important as small businesses, you all know, and of course this country know how difficult the challenges and the burdens are facing small businesses. And whether it's stubborn inflation or supply chain issues or just the development and access to workforce, retaining employees, all of those challenges continue to mount. But what we do know, of course, is small businesses remain, and I say this as many do, but I say it sincerely, remain the backbone of the American economy. It is, in fact, small businesses that innovate, that experiment, and ultimately create the jobs that our neighbors rely on, and the investment in our communities. And for that, we're just tremendously grateful. So for me, as a member of the Small Business Committee and joining you today, supporting through common sense economic policies those small businesses in order to grow and sustain economic development in our communities remains a top priority, in particular among the communities that I represent in 11 counties of upstate New York, from where New York meets Massachusetts to Binghamton and Ithaca, New York. I do want to note that the Small Business Committee is one of those bipartisan committees where we actually do get work done. You won't see us on national television all that often, but you will benefit from the work product. In particular, I want to note that we recognize the burden that many businesses face by a very heavy hand of federal, state, and local regulators. This past week, the House Small Business Committee, and then of course the House itself, passed my Post-it Act. So this particular legislation is meant to create a greater degree of accountability and transparency when it comes to federal regulation. I've often said, having spent every day of my adult life trying to make government actually work for people, I've said that too often, not only in the federal government doesn't the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, too often in the federal government, the left hand doesn't even know there is a right hand. And so small businesses face, as every business faces, this burdensome regulatory infrastructure that too often is confusing and in so many ways insurmountable. The Post-it Act requires the posting of regulation. And despite the fact that when regulations are issued, there's an initial summary, agencies themselves continue to add nuance and changes to those policies that ultimately make it very confusing. I think we all recognize this, but the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics noted of the top 20 occupations projected to see the biggest change in employment over the next 10 years, the majority of those jobs are in careers that require training beyond high school, but not necessarily four-year degrees. And we together have to continue to support career and technical education, not as an alternative, but a supplement to education opportunities for young people, so that ultimately we can prepare young people, students, and those reentering the workforce with the technical skills that they need to compete, and ultimately to help fill the workforce gap. I do want to note that we have a number of partners across the country that provide great assistance, and it's critically important that small businesses in particular lean on those development centers, small business development centers, and other partners both at the state and federal level that can be of some help to assist, in particular to assist in the implementation of apprenticeship and training programs. And we've seen this just a terrific opportunity to help build that pipeline from education to employment. The last thing I'll just note is we recognize that we've got to continue to make it easier and support the development of America's small businesses. I know this firsthand, and will tell you all those years ago as a local elected official, it is those small businesses that populate main streets all across America. They keep our communities together. They not only employ our neighbors, but they make investments in our community, supporting little leagues and soccer clubs and all those great programs and not-for-profit agencies that make up the very fabric of this country. And so with that, ultimately, we've got to work harder at the federal level, just as I did as a local official, to lighten the burden, create opportunity, and support the great innovators that make up America's main streets and small business community around the country. With that, I certainly look forward to a couple questions, and I'm grateful to be here with my colleague today.
Thank you. And Congressman Molinaro, you still look very young, so. And,
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
So now I'm honored to introduce Congressman Greg Landsman of Ohio. He's the second guest speaker for today's special event. Representative Landsman represents the 1st Congressional District of Ohio. In Congress, he's a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Tax and Capital Access, and a member of the Subcommittee on Rural Development, Energy and Supply Chains on the Small Business Committee. He's focused on supporting small businesses through legislation such as his Child Care Small Business Insight and Improvement Act, which would increase the SBA's role in supporting for-profit childcare small businesses across the country. Previously a public school teacher, Representative Landsman has spent his career advocating for the rights of children and families, and he led the effort to establish the City of Cincinnati's first ever Office of Ethics and Good Government. In our special event today, we'll hear briefly from Congressman about the work he's doing on topics that matter to small business owners, as well as his thoughts on the future for small businesses. We'll then have opportunity for him to respond to questions we've received from the audience. Congressman, thank you very much for being with us this morning, and we look forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
Well, good morning. Thank you all, and thank you for that great introduction. I also want to say that I really enjoy working with Congressman Molinaro, just a great leader, guy, and the Small Business Committee is one. There are a few committees that are still very bipartisan, where folks really enjoy working together, and the Small Business Committee is one of those, and it's one of the reasons why I chose it, in addition to my belief, like Mark, that small businesses really are at the heart of our economy, and always will be. And Cincinnati, that's the district that I represent. It's Cincinnati, and then the suburbs of Cincinnati. And I do have a county that is very rural, with farmers, and think about them a lot in terms of their their work and how we can be helpful as of course they are small businesses too. So we are a community of small businesses. I mean, we have some big corporate 500 companies, but by and large, like most places, we are a community of small businesses. And before I came to Congress, this is my first term, I was at City Hall for 5 years, and part of that was dealing with the aftermath of this global pandemic and how we were going to restart our economy. And we focused on small businesses, schools, helping get those back open, but really our small businesses to make sure that they had access to capital in addition to what was being provided at the federal and state level. We wanted to ensure that our small businesses also had additional resources from the city, and we prioritized it. And I think as a result, we came back much more quickly than others. So it just helped reinforce my belief in the role that the public sector plays in ensuring that small businesses have access to capital, that it's affordable, and that the SBA, now that I'm here, is doing all of the things it needs to do to help all of our small businesses. I have started to focus on childcare. A lot of folks don't know, and I certainly didn't until I got more involved in this at the local level, that most childcare providers are for-profit small businesses. Oftentimes we think of the nonprofits, or we assume that they're not nonprofits, and some of them are, but a lot of them are for-profits. And getting the SBA to provide additional, more meaningful support to these small businesses because they are core to helping all of the other small businesses and big businesses, but they play a very unique role. And so I'm really excited to be working with Mark and others to ask the SBA to tell us what playing a bigger leadership role and helping these small businesses in particular would look like, and what they will need from Congress. I believe it starts with leadership and asking them to really build out their leadership capacity to help. But the other things, and I'll say this quickly, that I think are very bipartisan, is helping small businesses deal with some of the tax reforms that have expired. One has to do with deducting R&D. The other has to do with deducting interest payments. Those are two big tax reforms that I believe need to be back on the books. And so my hope is that there's going to be bipartisan support for that.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for your time this morning. I really appreciate what you're doing for small businesses. We have received hundreds of questions for today's events, and I'd like to ask you both to respond to some of the questions posed by thousands of small business owners. First up, for Congressman Molinaro, Alex from Brooklyn, New York. Are there any upcoming policy changes, federal policy changes or new regulations that small businesses should be aware of?
To say that there are more regulations coming might perhaps be an understatement. So I think to get comments into mine as well, we'll continue to provide the appropriate oversight through Congress, but you're going to continue to get bombarded. And I hate to put it this way, but having once been an executive, I know that too often, once the legislature approves or disapproves of something, they find some new way to add a regulatory burden. So I just want to offer, in particular, the importance of the Posted Act. Historically, the federal government has in fact provided a clearinghouse for this kind of information. The fact that we don't any longer is pretty troubling. And so I just encourage you to learn a little bit more about the Posted Act, and we're going to continue to push for its ultimate adoption by the Senate, because I think that's the platform that we need through the Small Business Administration's ombudsman to identify for you a place where you can go to learn about those regulations as they either are implemented or updated. And I think it is important that there be that kind of transparency. Just as a reference, and I'll attempt to be as bipartisan in saying this as I can. It's not a criticism of Greg in any way, but since President Biden took office, it is important, I think, for us to note that there have been 711 final regulations added to small businesses, costing more than $436 billion and 236 million hours of paperwork. And the only reason I say that, of course, is that too often Washington and administrations, and by the way, Republican and Democrat, make decisions that impact small businesses without an understanding of the cost and the burden. And so this continues to have a detrimental effect on small businesses. And while, Alex, you and I could probably spend about an hour and a half me listing at least what regulations could come out of the federal government from every agency, from Department of Labor to EPA, I think it's best that we really push the federal government, the Senate and the president ultimately to sign the Posted Act into law so that there be that transparent clearinghouse. I do want to note, because I support clean energy policy and the transition of and a balanced approach to clean energy, but just as a note, I serve in upstate New York where it's pretty darn cold in winter. But I would note that whether it's New York State or the federal government's push through, in this case, through the Department of Energy's powers to create greater energy efficiency, regulations that would eliminate gas stoves or some refrigerating units could have an enormous impact on businesses. In fact, we estimate small businesses could be burdened by another $9,000 of new regulation and cost. Again, good policy. Whether you can argue this is good policy or not, good policy should also balance the impact to the end user, the business person, and that's what we're working to demand, not only through transparency but the appropriate oversight of Congress.
Congressman Landsman, do you have any views on that, or?
Yeah, I'd like to. I think that Mark makes a really good point about these appliances and some of the rules that are coming out, and I suspect there will be bipartisan pushback on a lot of these, especially the appliance stuff. It's again, it's well intentioned, but a lot of this newer, it's not balanced in the sense that a lot of the newer technology that's being used on newer appliances, they're not as rugged and they don't stick around, the way in which. My current refrigerator, for example, we've had it for 15 years. The pieces break and it becomes incredibly costly, and you end up buying a second or a third one in the course of 10 years, which really doesn't help the economy. So I think there's going to be bipartisan support for making sure that those rules make sense and pushing back when they don't.
Sure. Thank you. The next question we have is from Ilana in Atlanta, Georgia. How can small businesses access more leadership development courses and support in our community? So Congressman Molinaro, for you.
No, I appreciate that. First, having been a local official, I really want to encourage small business owners and those, working on the main streets across America to really engage with your local economic development organizations and I would dare say business associations, chambers of commerce, and otherwise. A lot of them provide great both training in your area of interest and certainly your area of business, but also just great networking opportunities to learn from those already engaged in business or working in the community. And I said this in my comments, and I really do mean it. Small businesses are often simply talked to. I mean, Greg, I'm sure, said the same thing, the backbone of our economy. Those are the things we say, but some of us actually mean it. And so your leadership, whether it's in local land use policy or building parks and playgrounds or investing in economic development and tourism, is really, really important. and taking advantage of those associations and partnerships, I think, are a great opportunity. I do want to note, as obviously a member of the Small Business Committee, it's also important, I think, for us to highlight the work of small business development centers. And I talked a little bit about this before, but with 900 locations across the country, there are either low cost or free counseling programs available to small business owners and employees that help strengthen, I think, your capacity to improve your business. And these public-private partnerships allow for, I think, great learning opportunities and growth. And so I really would encourage you and those watching to reach out to those SBDCs. There are some women economic development centers as well in partnership. Many of the SBDCs and WEDCs, WEDCs, sorry, are work in cooperation with higher learning institutions. I know in New York, of course, the partnership with the State University of New York is not only strong, it's critical, and they become not only places where you can learn, but you'll innovate. And I think that is a special partnership and certainly a real support apparatus that I encourage you certainly to take advantage of. And I do want to note, since we're members of Congress, the Small Business Workforce Pipeline Act, which I sponsored, does allow us to provide information and assistance to small business to help establish and improve apprenticeship programs and then pipeline to jobs. And so these are the tools that I hope we can embrace, but I really encourage leaning on SBDCs and the WEDCs. And take that special opportunity, I think, to connect with your local business association, chambers of commerce. Great opportunities to grow your experience and also your business.
Surely, and I think as a small business owner myself, I've seen that the importance of SBDCs and how if there's more education around cash flow for small businesses, that can really help them grow and improve their credit worthiness and grow their businesses faster. So very important point there, Congressman Molinaro. Next question we have is for Congressman Landsman from Matt in Toledo, Ohio. What does Congress plan to do to taper the existing rate of inflation that our economy is currently facing?
Great question, and it's a real issue, obviously, for small businesses, families. Everyone. This economy has been working its way back, and to fight inflation, the Fed has increased interest rates, as you all know, to a rate that is incredibly difficult for folks trying to buy a car or a home, for you all to ensure that you have the resources to make payroll. I mentioned this, but I just think it's something that we have to do, and I know it's being worked on in the Ways and Means Committee. It's just my hope is that it gets to the floor and that the Senate takes it up and passes it too. But it's allowing small businesses to deduct interest payments. That interest payment deduction reform that was in the I think 2017 tax bill should not have sunsetted. It's a big deal, especially right now, and so I think that's one of the most important things that we have to do.
Sure. Thank you, Representative Landsman. And next question we have is from Anne in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The question is, what initiatives is federal government considering to provide further support to American small businesses?
So I think a lot. Mark is right that sometimes it ends up being more of a burden in terms of some of the regulations, because the programming comes with all kinds of paperwork and hoops that folks have to go through. I want to go back to what Mark said about the SBDCs. I know that I assume that a lot of you, if not all of you, are plugged in. I just think it's so important as a way of staying, on top of what's happening, because some of it's not coming out of us. It's rulemaking coming out of the SBA or other departments, so agencies. So I think that is such a good point. and building really strong relationships at the local level, both with folks at City Hall, but also, as Mark said, the chamber and business roundtables at the state level, and also using us, your member of Congress and their office, and in all of it, I think is very similar, which is making sure that everybody knows who you are, what your business does, what your business needs are, and to stay sort of in constant contact, because that kind of visibility leads to folks saying, hey, I think I have something for you, or this change may affect you, and it makes a big difference.
Thank you, Congressman Landsman, and thank you, Congressman Molinaro, for joining this online forum and responding to the audience questions. Your continued support for small businesses and the initiatives has been game-changing, and we look forward to continuing to see this progression. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
At this time, we would now transition to the key findings from the small business industry study. We have Charles Groom from Biz2Credit, who would like to walk through the audience and the members about the key findings of the study. Over to you, Charles.
Thank you so much, Ramit. And again, thanks to the members of Congress for their participation in today's event. And Ramit, to you for leading us through that fantastic Q&A session. As Ramit alluded to, we have just released, you can find it on biz2credit.com, the top small business industries report for the year 2023, covering over 50,000 applications that Biz2Credit received from business owners for financing over the course of the last 18 months, seeking to explain and expand on the way that small business in the United States has evolved since the tapering off of the COVID-19 pandemic. Especially for this year, we are including in that report an emerging trends section that covers up-to-date data on how small businesses in different industries are trending. And of course, you can find this on biz2credit.com. So encourage you to check that out following the conclusion of today's event. If we dive into some of the findings that we're seeing from small businesses around the country, one of the key things that we track is how much funding small businesses are seeking based on the industry in which they operate. And very often, this is something that can be an indicator of where there's growth in the economy or where small businesses may be encountering headwinds, especially depending on their year-over-year comparisons. In this current study, which covered the full year 2022, we're seeing that the wholesale trade and information technology sectors in businesses that have under 250 employees and that qualify in that small business category, those sectors are seeing the average funded amount for businesses that apply around $100,000, which leads all the sectors that we currently track in this report in terms of total aggregate funding that they are securing. This speaks really to growth in opportunity in the information technology industry and also with wholesale, as retail has been continuing to move into the e-commerce realm, and more import-export operations are standing up for international trade brought into the United States. The wholesale sector has experienced this kind of growing demand and need for additional capital. If we look at the other side of the equation and look at some of those industries where funding values have been relatively lower, we tend to see that right now in the services sector and in the retail sectors, indicating still potentially somewhat of a lower overall appetite or demand in those industries. Of course, mind you that similarly, those sectors are populated by large numbers of small businesses, and as a result, the overall average tends to be weighted to the lower side. As we look here, we can see also the success rates in seeking funding. This is generally an indicator of the credit worthiness of businesses in these various sectors of the economy, and is an indication of, on average, where small businesses from different sectors are likely or not to secure funding based on their application. Of course, generally speaking, small business financing is tailored to an individual business's circumstances, both in regards to their cash flow as well as in regards to their business opportunity and their business plan. But when taken in aggregate, we see through data like this some of the indications about where small businesses are seeing success and where they are potentially still facing some headwinds. Now, it's interesting to note that the approval rates vary almost in reverse order to what we've seen in the average size of funding that small businesses are achieving. So you see here the approval rates on the left-hand side for wholesale and IT are relatively lower compared to, say, the retail sector and accommodation and services. Those in the IT and wholesale sector, seeing those slightly lower approval rates, often that will have to do with the nature of the number of businesses in that sector. So the averages sort of skew accordingly. And also from the standpoint of businesses in those industries, speaks to some of the volatility that businesses in those sectors are experiencing right now. If we look at the total picture of the small business economy by funding value that we are seeing, you can see that retail remains a very significant structure of the small business economy this past year, with about a quarter of all small business funding being in the retail trade space. Now, if we look at the underlying picture of how businesses are faring economically at the current moment, you'll see that the average business in the wholesale sector is bringing in just shy of $1 million, whereas your average business in that individual services or accommodation and food category is bringing in almost closer to $500,000. So a significant spread there between industries that, as we've indicated, are experiencing some of that more volatile period following COVID, and those that may still be trying to shake off some of the after effects of the pandemic era policy and pandemic era economy. We'll see that these revenue numbers shift as we look at this year over year. And for additional analysis, you can certainly dig into the report online. But if we look at the growth trajectory for businesses on the average revenue measurement, we can see that the IT sector is doing considerably well with about a 20% growth, and that actually hidden within that story about the total revenue for accommodation and food in a year-over-year comparison with 50% growth in revenue, we start to see that bounce back story coming into play for more and more of those restaurants, bars, hotels, and so forth that were heavily impacted by COVID. Similarly, although average revenues this year in the service sector are low, trending closer to $350,000 in annual revenues, those businesses have seen one of the highest growth rates in their revenue on a year-over-year basis, indicating again the driving force in the economy right now from a growth perspective in small business seems to be coming from those service sector components of the economy, although any given business there on average will have lower total revenues. And I think if we take a look at some of the emerging trends from just the first half of 2023, and of course we'll have this full report for 2023 will be available next year as we roll this over, we can see that there's been significant changes in the way that small business is looking as we continue to move into a new economic paradigm following the increase in interest rates, changes in inflation, and the unwinding of the pandemic era. On average, healthcare businesses tend to have the highest rate of approval for all financing applications that we've seen at Biz2 Credit. And that has a lot to do with the stability that companies in that sector are currently experiencing. There's definitely been an increase in investment in healthcare as an overarching category. And healthcare also tends to be one of those sectors that is largely inelastic in response to economic tendencies, such as these higher rates of inflation and higher interest rates. At the same time, information technology in the first half of this year has leapfrogged wholesale in terms of having that highest average funding value, at least for the first half of 2023. And we'll see if that trend solidifies for the full year in the report that we release next time. But for right now, you can understand that contrast where technology has really continued to seek and receive significant levels of onboard funding, especially if you consider what occurred in the first part in Q1 of 2023, where a lot of startup businesses in the technology sector were impacted by the disruption that occurred in the banking industry, such as what occurred with Silicon Valley or First Republic Bank. Now we continue to see that the core of the economy is improving and manufacturing businesses are clocking in with revenues north of $1 million in terms of those seeking capital in the first half of 2023. A lot of that will also be spurred by government policies that our congressmen who joined us earlier today were starting to refer to, including things related to onshoring or nearshoring more manufacturing power near the United States. And as I mentioned, for more complete details, you can find the full report on biz2credit.com in the Knowledge Center section under Research Reports. And so with that, we'd like to conclude today's session of this special forum with members of Congress hosted by Biz2 Credit and featuring Representatives Molinaro and Landsman. Thank you to all who have joined us today for tuning in to the session, whether you are joining us here on the webinar platform or on our live stream out on YouTube. We'll share a few details about the services that Biz2 Credit is providing and take you through a few closing remarks and reminders as well. At Biz2 Credit, we are committed to providing financing that helps more small businesses secure the best funding options for each and every project or capital need that they may face. With technology that makes business financing easy to understand and easy to access, Biz2 Credit helps tens of thousands of small businesses every year increase cash flow and find more success. Part of what we shared in that research report synopsis has a lot to do with that work. Biz2 Credit's financing products include fixed rate financing options and alternative financing options, including those that business owners can qualify for within 24 hours of submitting an online application. And on average, applications online take just about 4 to 5 minutes to complete. You're able to create an account online at biz2credit.com or by contacting our hotline, which you can see on the Biz2 Credit website. And you can submit an application today or anytime, 24/7, available online. As we conclude today's session, we'd like to share a few reminders about resources that are available on our website or by signing up for our newsletter. You can locate the sign-up form on biz2credit.com or visit the Knowledge Center section of our website, again, on biz2credit.com. You'll find the top small business industry study there released yesterday, as well as other research that Biz2 Credit features, including the study on women-owned businesses and Hispanic-owned businesses and the top 25 cities for small business annually. If you have additional questions that you'd like to be answered either in our follow-up communications or on one of the future sessions in this special series, you can enter those questions in the Q&A section as we conclude the session today. We will be leaving the stream running for an additional minute or two, just so everyone has a chance to do that. If you have a question as well for our Biz2Credit funding team, you can expect a direct one-on-one outreach from our team following the session. So if you want to, just enter that question in the Q&A panel now. And again, thank you all very much for joining. We'll leave that session open for just a few more minutes as you enter those questions in before the stream disconnects. Thank you once again for joining us. This session will now conclude. As a reminder, a recording of today's webcast will be made available in the Biz2Credit Webcast Center at the conclusion of the session. Your session will now disconnect automatically. Thank you.